I am.
Over the past 3 decades, tuition has increased at a rate higher than inflation. In relation to this, CNBC reported this September that student debt had reached an all-time high of $1.2 trillion. This is the second highest category of debt for people in the U.S., second only to mortgages. For my claim of fact speech, I plan to show you guys that high tuition costs and high overall costs to attend college in the U.S. is often brought on by students. I'm going to do this by first explaining that colleges compete for students and this competition bears costs. Second, that students tend to take on loans and financial aid when college is not affordable, and this leads to tuition increases becoming stable. And last, I will explain how the U.S. culture defines college as an experience, or as a rite of passage, and with this comes a substantial price tag. Okay. So for my first claim, I'll show you how competition for students' enrollment has increased the cost of going to college. It's no secret that universities aim to attract students through the quality of their programs. Integrating the newest technology is often one way of doing this, although it is very expensive to do that. Students are also drawn to universities with knowledgeable and talented professors, like our professor here. One article from the American Council on Education notes that there is only a limited number of professors like this, and competition to keep that faculty could drive up their salaries. Colleges also seek to maximize their enrollment. And with an increase in the capacity of students a university takes on, comes an increase in the need for administrative and supportive staff. According to the Center for College Affordability and Productivity, the past 20 years have seen a doubling of support staff. All of these costs are poured into students' tuition, and universities' attempts to provide the best education to as many students as they can has caused tuition to increase. In order to make all of these costs affordable, subsidizing tuition has become the norm. For my second claim, I will show how as students take on loans and financial aid, this leads to the stabilization of tuition increases. According to a recent article that quotes College Board, the United States appears to have overcome price as a barrier for access to post-secondary education. They also went on to note there was $168 billion awarded in aid during the 2009 and 2010 school years. All this aid artificially provides a means for students to attend college when otherwise they would not be able to do so. Now, morally, there's nothing wrong with this, but looking at it in simply an economic sense, we can see differently. So you see, without any real competition in terms of tuition, and if students could not afford to go to college and financial aid was not awarded to them, enrollment in these schools would fall. And schools would be forced to lower tuition in order to entice more students into their schools. None of this, however, happens because students are willing to take on debt or financial aid in order to attend college. Now for my last claim, I hope to show you guys that as students in the U.S., we have a very expensive culture in regards to our college experience. Take, for instance, all the amenities we enjoy on campus, like our Baraka Student Center, our health center, even the brand new recreation center. All of these things are added into the cost to go to Cal Poly. It's almost as though our schools are all-inclusive resorts. In comparison to our culture, a recent article describes a situation in much of Europe where tuition is a fraction of what it costs here. In Germany, recently, they abolished tuition altogether. And the article states that universities across the pond are simply places for education, and they don't come with the added amenities that many schools in the U.S. do. This all points to the fact that much of our tuition is a product of our own doing. So in conclusion, I have attempted to convince you all that high tuition and the higher overall cost to attend college in the U.S. is often brought on by us as students. I've done this by first stating that colleges compete for our enrollment, and this competition increases the cost to attend. I then showed that our use of financial aid and student loans actually provides the means for rises in tuition, or for rises in tuition to sustain themselves. And last, I showed how the culture behind our college universities tends to increase the costs to attend schools. Thank you.
All right, Kevin, the proposition originally as phrased was a little bit complicated, but the secondary claims I think help explain it a lot more, and there's a good preview of those secondary claims. You label them very clearly. I thought you did a nice job explaining each of those concepts. Where there needs to be a little bit more work is in developing those concepts and proving those particular points. The link, for instance, between trying to drive people to your school, recruiting or making the schools pretty attractive, and the costs is hinted at. You make a recommendation, or I should say a kind of a hypothetical example about the faculty. I know it's not me driving up prices. I wish, you were all paying double as a result of my high salary. But that's not the way it worked in public institutions, and I think that's one of the things that you need to look at is that there are differences, for instance, and maybe some of those private institutions drive up costs and then the public institutions maybe compete with them, but it's all very hypothetical at this point. You don't really have any hard data on that, and especially when you're talking about other costs on the third point, amenities that the students might be gaining. That's another place where I think you need some statistical data. So you've explained the concept. What you haven't got is any data to drive the proof on that particular concept. I think you did a good job on the second point, again, explaining the concept that we have too many students with willing to take on debt chasing the resources and therefore increasing the prices. The theory there makes sense. I do think that there's probably a lot of statistical data that could show, for example, how much wider access is, how many more students are going to college, how much debt they are taking on, Gesundheit, compared to how much they're able to pay off those things, and maybe even kind of comparing how the debt has gone up with the increases in tuition too. I'm sure that there's probably some way that you could relate those things. So you just need some data to go along with the theory that you've got there. On the third point, you had a little bit more data, but it's not a lot. You have the comparison to the European institutions, and you say basically they don't have those kinds of amenities. So does that mean that students don't live on campus? They don't have any facilities when they're on campus? They don't have access to libraries or laboratories or those kinds of things? That seems a little bit strange. If it's, I understand what you're talking about here. For instance, you mentioned the 3 or 4 facilities that are made available. How is that paid for in the tuition increases? That's what you need to show. And I didn't really think that I got much data even with the examples that you're using. So that's a little problematic. All right, thank you. Jason, we're going to have you next, please.